Hello Internet and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming. My name is Wyatt and today we're going to be doing our review for Pathfinder Lost Omens, Knights of Lastwall. Before we go too far, don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this content. It really helps the channel. So Knights of Lastwall is the new book for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Lost Omens line, which is a sort of lore and setting first, mechanics later sort of books, very different from the core rule books that sort of have the opposite vibe, but both tend to have a good mix. This one in particular covers of course, Knights of Lastwall. These are an organization of knights that have sort of basically are the last remnants of a city that was hit by a very powerful lich named Tarpafon when he was sort of raised up. And so basically these are people who are bent on defending the living from the scourge of dead that are rising because their master has returned. What that means is that this is a book that's probably going to appeal to about 1 in 4 campaigns at a minimum, because there are really only a handful of, big overarching enemies you can have. Demons, dragons, undead, fae, I suppose. And, this is one of them. So odds are this is a book you're going to be pretty interested in. As always with these Lost Omens books, if you don't play in Golarion, that doesn't mean you should just skip these over. I don't generally play in Golarion. I'm running an Abomination Vaults game right now, but other than that, everything's homebrew for me. But undead are a very common trope in this hobby, so even if you're not Golarion specific, you're probably going to have orders of knights or some sort of organizations that hunt undead, and this is going to provide you great blueprints, feats, concepts, NPCs even, and things like that you can drop right into your game, even if it's not in this setting in particular. One thing to note right at the top, there's this sort of running theme throughout the book, of this, sort of new recruit, and sort of a little bit of art and text from the perspective of, you're just joining these knights, and as the book goes and the art that features this character continues, you see them grow up and grow into this role from a very, small child to somebody leading charges on the battle. So it's very cool, and it's a really neat sort of idea to help you get immersed and feel like what it would be like to be a part of this organization. We begin with coverage of the history as well as the different ranks and sub-factions of the organization of the knights and all their orders and things. As always, we see lots of sidebars detailing associations, recruitment techniques. One of my favorite parts, though, is the slang used by the Knights of Lastwall. I'm just going to read you off a little something I wrote using the slang just because I think this is the kind of thing that I really love in setting books. I still have quotes from my Warforged days playing Eberron, but wrath and woe, we got a hisser in that alley with all the marks of a right hand. Have those Cassies fall back to a twist. I want plumes on the roofs and the back exit watching for smoke, and then send a mant with all the silver and sparks we can spare. That's fun. I said nothing that probably anybody could follow, but if you've read this book, you'll get that, and I'm going to be using that text in my world, even though, like I said, I'm not playing in this world. So this is one of my favorite parts. So if you're watching, whoever at Paizo is in charge of these things, more in-universe slang, please. I gobble it up. After some details on enemies and allied groups, we cover the different factions a little more in depth, as well as profiles on notable people within the knights. One thing to note, if you're looking for anything definitive on who or what is the patron of the Crimson Oath, we got nothing concrete here. Don't expect any big revelations. I don't really think that we had anything as far as new information, although we got some sort of a little more in-universe references to who people think could be possible culprits for who's empowering these knights. And if you don't know, the Crimson Oath is an oath sworn that sort of empowers, not necessarily, depends on which feats you take, but is a subsect within the Knights of Lastwall, and they have some sort of divine powers that they get access to, or something similar to divine. Again, we don't really know, but it allows you to take some spell-like ability sort of things that we've seen before, and we get a bunch more now. It's one of those archetypes that gives some focus spells, but now we get even more options within it. So if you like that idea of a character who is not necessarily a champion, a paladin, cleric, or anything like that, but has taken an oath to uphold certain ideals, we are seeing that. And this also makes me wonder, because I know that we have some pact archetype of some sort coming later with Dark Archive later this year. And I wonder how similar some of these ideas and concepts will be if we'll see this get more fleshed out. And if so, if that pact archetype goes well, I wonder if we'll see a little more information or a little more alternative options besides the one there and the one here. I think it's a great idea and a really cool way to, add magical sort of feeling abilities to characters that don't necessarily want to deal with full spellcasting proficiencies and things like that. In any case, no update on the patron of the Crimson Oath. Paizo is going to keep us in the dark on that one for at least a while yet. If I missed something, if you're watching this and you have the book in your hands and you've read through it and you see where I missed something about that, please let me know. I'm very curious. It's a lot of people are wondering about it. So if I missed something, please let me know. Towards the end of the book, we get some information on the regions, both within the Lastwall area, but also throughout Golarion, and the threats that you may find them. Not all of the threats that you may find there, not all of them will be undead. We actually get a few wandering encounter tables, which is something that we don't see too often. I think we have seen it maybe once before. But with an emphasis that parties may need to run away from certain more powerful creatures there, which is very traditional in that idea of wandering monsters table. If at your table you understand that the math can be very dangerous and you don't think your players will have the wisdom to run from fights they can't win, you can always pare down that list, roll a smaller die, take a smaller chunk of that list and roll from there, and still have a pretty wide selection of random encounters that could show up without risking sending your party against something that's way over their level or way under their level if you don't want to worry about them just steamrolling through things either. But this section covers not just what the knights are doing, but what their allies are doing throughout Golarion, well outside of the range of, I can't remember the name of the Isle of Dread and things like that. But you also, we also get some sidebars that are devoted to additional reading in other published works. So if you really want to deep dive on something that's only passively mentioned, there's a good chance they're going to have, a book page reference and stuff that you can go and you can check out more information if you want it. So that's sort of the overarching lore part. Let's get to the mechanics. So there's a lot of new stuff. We get deep dives on several deities and pantheons. So, and some of them are reprinted, but some are definitely new. But that means that if you have a cleric character and you want a new deity, you don't like what's there, might be something for you here. But everything here is stuff that, even the reprinted ones are stuff that either didn't get a full page in Gods and Magic and things like that, or maybe something has changed. One of the more interesting ones is Erasni, who is presented again. She's had a full page before in another book, but now she's getting a new one, and she's got very different art. And that's normal. They usually will do either a different culture's view of the deity, because the idea is that, every culture within the world sort of has their own views and imagery and iconography for each deity. But this is a very different one, and we're beginning to see that shift of Erasni from being a sort of victimized demigod to being this, to freeing herself and allowing herself to be free and become this champion for the abused and the victimized. And it's not there yet. She's not gone back to her goodness that she used to have before she was corrupted and, her body was stolen and raised as undead by, various, like Tarbathon and then Geb. But she is on that way, and she's one of very few, if any, deities that allow, she is chaotic, or she is lawful neutral or true neutral, I'm not sure. But she does allow lawful good and true good followers of her. Maybe just lawful good. But that's interesting, and it shows that she's this sort of deity in transition from who she was in first edition to who she's becoming. Maybe will be in second edition, maybe not until third, who knows. But it's really cool to see it, how a deity is changing in front of us lore-wise. We also get a few new backgrounds, including 2 rare ones. One gives a spell-like ability, nothing quite as crazy as we've seen in some other of the rare backgrounds, but definitely a little off the beaten path, and, new backgrounds are always going to be good as a jumping off point for new players and new characters. Now let's talk feats. There are a lot of feats for the existing Lastwall archetypes. We have the Knights Vigilant, the Lastwall Sentries, and the Knights Reclaimant. So all of those are getting a lot of attention, at least a dozen, I think maybe a lot more than a dozen. We'll say about a dozen or so feats for each of those. The Knights Vigilant include a ritual to summon your armor onto yourself, some feats for phalanx fighting, and a feat you can take multiple times to gain thematic innate spell based on a sworn oath. That ties in, but is not the Crimson Oath, because that's the Knights Reclaimant that we're about to get to. But it is nice, and it even calls out that you're not going to let the Crimson Oath show you up. You're going to swear your own oath. But it's really cool, and I hope, again, we just see more things like that. The Knights Reclaimant can pick up new focus spells, as I sort of mentioned earlier, and another to choose from a list of innate spells, or a feat to fight with the flat or pommel of a weapon to add the versatile bludgeoning damage or trait to it, so that they can switch freely from damage types. A lot of undead have specific weaknesses or resistances to different the physical damages, so it's not a bad feat to have. Finally, the Lastwall Sentries, I feel like got more than average. I didn't count, but I think they got more than a few more than the others. They got a bunch of new options, including a feat to never become undead yourself. And in fact, your body becomes painful, harmful to undead that try to feed off of it or move it or anything like that. A great shield reaction feat to shove an enemy who critically misses you. And a free action to harm undead that you shield block and to counterspell evil magic with a religion check. So lots of cool tools over there. I just love that idea of somebody's casting a spell and you just do a religion check and you know the right oaths or words of protection or whatever to counter it, even if you don't have any spells yourself. That's really neat and something we just haven't seen a lot of, and it really opens up a lot of weird character concepts that we don't have access to before. We also get a number of additional feats for 9 other archetypes and classes not directly related to the knights, and there's a sidebar listing which archetypes would be best suited if you're running a free archetype campaign and you want to limit it to Lastwall appropriate sort of free archetypes, that it gives you a list of what could work there. One thing to note about all these extra feats as well is that in addition to the new feats that we also got a little bar at the beginning of the Knights section telling us what existing feats Knights can also take. So additional feats, we've seen it before, but we've never seen them retroactively apply them, because these are feats from the core rulebook that existed before we even had these archetypes that I guess through, playtesting and sitting on it for a couple of years, they have decided are appropriate for these characters. Some from the core rulebook, some from various other places. So even beyond what we have just baseline printed in this book, you're also getting expanded options for those Knights of Lastwall that are even more than what's just here. So back to those new class and archetype feats, we get some awesome teamwork style feats, and like the ones that we've seen previously in Guns and Gears, the Overwatch and the Sniping Duo archetypes, only one character needs to take these feats to benefit, although, you can't both turn it on, you'd both need a feat to initiate some of these, but in terms of the passive benefits and things, you don't both have to have it. So you and, for example, a shield ally can stand next to each other as long as you both raise a shield. If you've got the feat, you can make it so that you guys are both acting as cover for each other. It's really cool. It's a nice, sort of phalanx thing. And it's really, really neat. For those that don't know, first edition teamwork feats, both people generally would have to have them. And so it made it a really high cost of entry. Functionally, if one person took the feat, it was worthless unless 2 people had taken the feat. And just, it's hard to justify, hard to pitch that to people in a modern tabletop landscape that you've both got to have this feat for it to work for either of you. So I'm glad we're seeing that. It's a great design choice. I'm glad we're moving away from it. We also get a bunch of feats for casters and just about everything, but we get a feat for witches or sorcerers that gives you a new familiar list of familiar abilities, and it sort of tags your familiar as this sort of divine emissary of some sort, not necessarily good or bad, but and it gives you some really cool new abilities there. There's a feat for spirit barbarians to be able to grab and grapple incorporeal undead and use their unarmed attacks as ghost touch weapons and stuff like that, which really opens up a wide number of options there, and it's just really fun to just grab a ghost. But there's also several feats that give abilities that feel like spells, as I sort of mentioned, but aren't. Very much like spell-like abilities from older editions of the game. Many with no cooldowns or uses per day requirements. Just as long as you're spinning the actions, you can do it. And I really like that. I hope we see more and more of that. Not just because, it's interesting to have more options. Of course it's interesting to have more options. But because I like this idea of having these magical-like abilities that non-magical characters can use. You don't have to worry about keeping up with your spell DCs, rolling spell attacks, or anything like that. But you can still do these things that are not quite mundane, and I really hope we see so much more of that. One of them, you create a 100-foot tall, 30-foot wide pillar of light, which is dope. As I sort of said, most of these feats are going to be applicable to more than one class or archetype, as it were. And I believe almost everything from the core rulebook and APG gets at least one of these new feats. The only exceptions that I noticed were Rogue and Monk. We also get a few pages of new equipment, not a whole lot, but what's there is pretty good. They made good use of the space, from portable altars and impressive tabards that give you a bonus when dealing with people who recognize the organization, to traveling cloaks suited to stave off different types of weather. We also get a couple of new weapons, a hidden bladed gauntlet sort of thing with a retractable blade, which is super cool, and a short lance with like a built-in shield. So it lacks reach, but it has the parry trait. So nice little defensive if you wanted to be, just using like a lance, like a shorter lance. You can't see my arms, but a shorter lance. Something not necessarily requiring you be on horseback to not look ridiculous. We get a new armored coat base armor. We get a few weapon and armor modifications, a rune to summon weapons into your hand, and various things that you can apply to your weapon and armor. About a dozen new magic items, including a pop-up magic stable to store your animal companions, mounts, and things like that. And new saddles for mounts, which, not a lot of options for companion animals, so having these new spells are really good for that. I'm sorry, not spells, items. Just because there's not a lot of companion items. There's a horn to summon celestial allies, a shield that makes enemies focus on you over allies, which is a cool mechanic and something that, a lot of people coming from video games, playing a tank character may say, why don't I have a way to make people want to hit me? And there's a few, but it's nice to always get another one. We also get about 20 new spells, including a way to locate the creator of a slain undead, which is super cool. A spell that lets two allies stride or step in unison together by using each other's reactions. It lasts for a minute. It can really increase the mobility of a party. Very cool. We get a couple of much needed good attacking spells on the divine list. We got some good cantrip coverage and stuff like that previously for divine, but we got some really pretty nice attack spells as far as it goes. You have the usual pros and cons of those divine damage, blasting sort of spells, and that usually they're working on a narrower list of creatures. But the power is good. The fact that you're less likely to hit your allies because, like with Lightning Bolt, your allies may not resist lightning, but if you're dealing a beam of good damage, like one of the spells, instead of having to worry about them saving against the electricity, if they're not evil, they're not taking damage. So, if you know that you're fighting evil and you know that your party's not evil, you can really blast away without having to worry about radiuses and stuff. So that's, if you're seeing these divine spells and you're feeling like they're maybe a little weaker, that's why. It's because very often it's a lot easier to not blast your own party with these, and so their versatility is made up for a little bit with the reduced damage and the reduced types of targets who can take the damage. So don't sleep on those is what I'm saying. And another one of them scales just as good as any other first level spell on the Arcane or Primal list, and it's Divine. So now one thing that almost goes without saying with these Paizo books, but I'm going to say it anyway because it bears repeating, is the art is just stellar. It's always top notch. We get to see all sorts of different colors, heritages, and ancestries and backgrounds for different knights within the different orders. We also see what I counted as, I think, 4 or 5 depictions of characters using either prosthetic limbs or combat wheelchairs that we first saw in the Grand Bazaar book. These represent both wounded veterans, who aren't done fighting for, their homeland or their, whatever it may be. But it's also, people that were rescued and want to give back to the organization that saved them or their families or whatever the case may be. There's even special mention of how the knights will make use of and find a place for anyone who wants to join, even if they aren't up to it physically. They'll find, they'll find administrative roles, support, healing, whatever they can find for you to do. And I just think there's just something so great about that, this idea that it says, if somebody's too injured to help, they'll turn them away twice, but on the third time, if they ask to join again, they get rewarded for that dedication and they get brought into the organization and they'll find a place for you no matter what. And I just love that idea of, these are organizations who have been through it. I mean, they're functionally fighting a world war against an army that never stops coming back, right? And so this idea that they're saying, we don't want you to endanger yourself, but if you're committed to doing this, we're not going to turn you away. I love that. And, on the subject of art, the gorgeous cover features, I hope I'm saying this right, Calibrin Iomidar, a trans woman, a mother, a total badass, and the sort of, for lack of a better term, de facto leader, the closest thing to a former leader of the Knights of Lastwall. She is very cool. The art is excellent and just top-notch there. So in closing, we've got all the lore is represented in depth with references to go look for reading elsewhere if you want to go even more in depth than what's there. Lots of NPCs, organizations, everything you can drop in, even if you're not in the world. So players and GMs alike are going to find some really cool stuff here. Overall, the new mechanical options in this book are pretty great. While some things are a little niche, maybe, nothing looks particularly weak at all. And, some, as is the case with many thematic character options that you'll see in these sort of books, will be downright incredible in certain games. So, without breaking the existing balance, which is very good because they're just a little niche. So it's okay if they kind of aren't great here because they're extra good here. But if you are looking at a book about knightly orders who fight undead, most likely the stuff that you're going to be seeing in there is going to work for you. So that's great. The new sort of miscellaneous feat presentation they did is very cool because it allows them to fit in a bunch of feats without having to make separate headers for each, class and things like that. All the new feats are just sort of, in a row for the existing classes are just sort of in a row, at their levels and, tells you who can take them as part of the tags or the prerequisites. This both allows them to not have to worry about, trying to reprint or whatever for the ones that apply to multiple character classes and things like that. But it also, like I said, it's going to save a lot of space. And if that's something that's going to allow them to squeeze more of these feats and more of these content in, then I am all about that. One thing that's really great about this book is that almost every character you probably have at least has something they might be interested in. Even if you're not necessarily an undead fighter, maybe you just like shields and defensive fighting, there's tools in here for you. Maybe you don't fight enough undead to devote yourself to one of these archetypes, but you fight enough that spending one of your class feats, picking up one of these new feats that apply to your class is totally worth it to you. And I really like that. It's something that, the core classes, I'm not going to say that they're generic or anything, but they really, the core book was really all about as broad appeal as possible because that's how the first book wants to go, right? And so as we continue to get these more thematic books, I really like that they're going back and adding, even if it's just one or two new feats to the existing stuff, rather than just sort of abandoning them and saying, oh, we're only worried about new archetypes now or this or that. Not abandoning the existing content is very good for the life of the game. And finally, as we've been seeing, they're pushing the envelope in what they want to do with these character options. Again, not breaking the balance, but definitely pushing it and seeing what happens. Tentatively, carefully at first to sort of see what sticks. But one thing that we have here that's that is worth noting is there's an item, this sort of compendium of undead, I think it's called, undead compendium, my bad, that will grant, if you spend 10 minutes looking through it with your party and reading aloud to them the section on the particular undead you're about to go and face for the next 10 minutes, everyone gets a +2 item bonus to saving throws and attacks. This may not sound that impressive, especially since I think it's about a level 10 item, so you'll probably have at least a +1 to a lot of stuff. Marshals will definitely be getting +2s, if not already very soon. What you may not have noticed, though, is that it is not limited to just martial weapon attacks. That means spell attacks. As far as I know, this is the only, again, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments, please let me know, the only way that spellcasters can get an item bonus to their attack rolls, especially one that's going to last for an entire fight like this, potentially. So this is very big and a very sort of broad change from what we've seen before, where they've been very careful with these spellcaster attack bonuses. And they're feeling it out. It's very limited use, once per day. You have to spend 10 minutes reading about a particular undead that you know you're about to face, and then it only lasts for 10 minutes. So it's not something that you can spam or use all the time. It's definitely not going to impact the overall power level of the spellcasters that exist in your game, but it will give them a really nice edge in these certain situations that, of course, could come up very often if you're playing certain types of campaigns, but not so often, once per day, that you should feel like you shouldn't allow it. It's really cool and something that I've been very cautious about, item bonuses to spell attack rolls. So this is a really nice little solution. And I hope we see more like this, sort of broadening it out, but none of them universally broad, of course. And that's it. That's the Knights of Lastwall. I'm sorry, I normally hold up the book, but I just have the digital copy right now. My physical copy has shipped. It's on its way. But what do you think? Are you excited about this? What sort of characters do you want to build? And, have you been waiting for more information on Knights of Lastwall to run an undead heavy campaign or something like that? Do you use them in do you use the Knights in a homebrew campaign or something like that, like I do? Let me know down below, or come hang out on our Discord and let us know there. Thanks so much for watching. We really appreciate it, and welcome to the collective. We'll see you next time.